The Smackdown vs. Raw title series is fondly remembered for a laundry list of reasons. An endearing roster featuring timeless talents, constant improvements to the graphics and gameplay year in and year out, and maybe most importantly, game modes that kept us all busy and dumping hours of our adolescence into these games. In this video, we're going to look back at all of the game modes these games had to offer, and I've ranked them worst to best. This is a subjective list of course, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well. Let's get started with the worst game mode of all. Career Mode. Career Mode is a game mode that was around for just 2 years, appearing in Smackdown vs. Raw 2009 and Smackdown vs. Raw 2010. And in all honesty, this is a game mode that I say good riddance towards. Career Mode was a game mode of climbing ladders or going through towers of championship divisions, where you will isolate yourself into going through a path of fixed opponents, ultimately leading to challenging the champion/leader. There are no cutscenes or theatrical elements along the way, and upon completing the ladder or winning the championship, there is no satisfying nod of achievement other than toting around the title for a short time while you challenge for the next championship. The primary benefit of playing this game mode is the option to improve the attributes and abilities of your created wrestlers, which was the only way to do so in Smackdown vs. Raw 2009. In Smackdown vs. Raw 2010, there were other means to improve the attributes of your created stars, which would render this game mode more or less useless. This game mode just simply wasn't very fun, honestly. Completing it felt like a drag and it didn't feel rewarding enough to excuse it. Upgrading your created wrestlers to acceptable levels felt like a chore. Career Mode would be taken out of the games after just a 2-year stint, and it wouldn't be missed. We covered this game mode in another video, which will be shown at the end of this video as well as the link being in the description, but as far as this discussion goes, I'm not afraid to proclaim this game mode as the worst of them all. Tournament Mode. Tournament Mode was another short-lived game mode that allowed you to create your own tournament in varying styles and sizes. One really cool thing Smackdown vs. Raw 2008 implemented was the option to run a beat the clock challenge, something that hasn't been seen since the game mode was retired after Smackdown vs. Raw 2009. This gave the option for something more complex than just a standard tournament by adding the stipulation of time to beat, though you can still run a standard King of the Ring themed format. This mode wasn't exclusive to singles competition either. Tag team tournaments were also fair game, with the goal of ultimately competing for a championship. The champions in question were those who held titles in your exhibition mode as well, meaning there was potential for some level of continuity, albeit at the labor of the player. This is an interesting game mode without any glaring holes, and it does offer something that is rather unique, but it just doesn't go very far or offer a ton of reason to come back after going through once or twice, leaving this game mode towards the bottom of the barrel. Pay-per-view mode. Pay-per-view mode gave the opportunity to create your own pay-per-view match cards, or play from a list of historically influenced pay-per-views that are available from the beginning. These shows provided unique and custom pre-show packages featuring the main eventers of your show, including opening pyro as well, which was something that was extremely innovative for its time. Pay-per-view mode also made for an arena in which you can defend your created championships in, and you don't just have to play pay-per-views. You could create your show in Raw, Smackdown, Heat, or even Velocity to simulate a full cohesive show rather than bouncing in and out of exhibition mode, with the option to include up to 8 matches on a single event and being able to utilize all of the match types this game has to offer. This mode was ahead of its time, as the formatting of these match cards would look extremely similar to the format of Universe mode used later on in the series, proving to be influential to game modes of the future. Though what holds this game mode back is the fluidity and polish of, or lack thereof. Long loading screens, which may be more attributed to the older hardware this game mode was included in, but regardless, this made the setup feel slow and clunky. There was no connection from show to show, and every show required its own save file slot, elongating the time it takes to go from bell to bell. Finally, while created championships are a nice touch, there is no option to compete for the actual championship though, leaving that element of presentation lacking, which is disappointing, when presentation is what sets this mode apart from standard play now. Overall, this mode has a lot of good things to say about it, but I never found myself playing it much, especially if more options are on the table. Challenge Mode. While the original Smackdown vs. Raw did have challenges that you could complete for in-game currency, those were happenstance based on when or if you could complete them during your standard gameplay. However, an interface where you could jump straight into most of these challenges was introduced in the locker room in Smackdown vs. Raw 2006, and 2 years later underwent a makeover and donned the name Hall of Fame Mode. Some may argue that these are different, but let's be real here. Hall of Fame Mode, while enjoyable, was a shrunken down challenge mode loosely based off of historical events. While the earlier versions were almost strictly for leisure aside from some loading screens, locker room collectibles, and other cosmetics, Smackdown vs. Raw 2008's Hall of Fame mode would act as an unlock requirement for various legends, arenas, and auxiliary championships. While Hall of Fame mode was centered around completing real-life milestones like winning the Money in the Bank ladder match against those who were actually a part of the match, or winning the Royal Rumble from the #1 spot, the 2006 and 2007 iterations were a much larger collections of tiered challenges, where you would find yourself having to defy the odds of the weight detection system, come out of difficult scenarios on top, and it even has its own share of historical moments and references as well. All in all, these game modes are fun ways to play the game differently than you might normally, and providing the satisfaction of unlocking some features or parts of the roster that will always leave the game mode feeling like it rewarded you for the time is a nice touch. Though if not for the unlocks, you could own these games for years and never touch challenge mode, seeming as it's more or less a collection of customized exhibition matches. 24/7 mode. The infamous 24/7 mode was a game mode that in actuality was two different game modes that entirely operated on a similar weekly progression system and also shared the same save file. 24/7 mode only made one appearance in the Smackdown vs. Raw title series, and if you ask me, that is 1 year too many. As implied, 24/7 mode consists of the day-to-day of being a WWE superstar or general manager to some extent. This is the first time we would see a WWE game feature a calendar format and advancing week to week, something that is still around to this day, as well as allowing the player to actually enhance either the superstar you're playing as or one on your roster, either through increasing their attributes or popularity through a plethora of simulated tasks. This added a nice touch to this year's GM mode side of things, as increasing the popularity of your stars became exponentially easier and more impactful. However, as I've touched in previous videos, the Smackdown vs. Raw 2008 roster is so scarce that a general manager mode playthrough with the base roster simply doesn't provide enough depth for 3 brands to make for a compelling playthrough. The superstar aspect of 24/7 mode simply isn't finished, and I get that a bunch of things suddenly happened during the development of the game that proved to be a challenge to navigate, though it's impossible to ignore how repetitive that mode becomes after just a short time, whether it be cutscenes or simply rerunning multiple angles on a different brand. Not to mention the numerous spelling errors hiding within the in-game articles. There's a ton of things I could say about this game mode, but I'll prevent myself from rambling on a tangent here and simply say that while this gameplay option does contain a mode that has been missed ever since the game was out on shelves in general manager mode, alongside what feels like a mandatory aspect of any wrestling game in story mode, the missteps taken on the execution side of things is inexcusable for this list and finds itself as low as it does. Story mode. A classic single-player story mode that would put the fans into the role of WWE superstar, whether using a created wrestler or an established favorite on the roster. Story mode, or sometimes referred to as season mode, but for the purpose of this video we'll recognize them as the same. Story mode would last well before the first Smackdown vs. Raw, and run all the way to Smackdown vs. Raw 2007, where after that, this game mode would undergo various changes, which we've touched on with the 24/7 mode, and we'll get into more shortly, so stick around. The story mode would feature raunchy storylines, eerie angles, and wild situations that go beyond the boundaries of possibility. This mode was also enhanced by voice acting from your favorite superstars, with some performances varying from great to sounding out of context to just downright bad. I think it's safe to say if you haven't played the story modes in at least one of these games but owned them back then, you would be amongst a very small percentage of players. All 3 of these games provided enjoyable single-player experiences that immersed us into all kinds of match types and gameplay scenarios. However, this game mode would soon see a major overhaul in the coming years with 24/7 mode, and then a total transformation into another game mode, which you'll have to stick around for. So many fond memories come from this game mode, and there are many iconic storylines that stand out even playing them almost 20 years ago. However, the fact that most story mode playthroughs would look the same regardless of what characters you play as, to the exception of a few different storylines, really limits the replayability of this mode, keeping it from being at the top of this list. Story designer. In all honesty, since becoming a content creator, this mode may have become my personal favorite, or at least a solid number 2 behind general manager mode. Cutscenes, theatrical elements, and options to bring your gameplay beyond the ropes had finally arrived. And it was something my friends and I wished the WWE games had for so long, an avenue to really take a step beyond just matches to simulate the presentation and the spectacle that encapsulates so many fans into watching. This mode has many elements that mimic the show schedule and timeline that Universe Mode holds, with the ability to book however many matches your show sees fit. Story Designer reminds me of a clunky version of what an amazing Universe Mode could be, though Story Designer is totally up to the creator versus having an element of automation. What keeps this game mode from being at the top, in my opinion, is the amount of time that goes into setting up your scenes, dialogue, storylines, etc., compared to the time spent watching or playing your product. And I'm not even talking about the work that is naturally required for a production of this nature, but rather referring to the dozens and dozens of loading screens you go through when setting up scenes as well as navigating the stories and gameplay. Smackdown vs. Raw 2010 and 2011 finally began implementing these elements that go beyond the bell that you could determine, whereas any kind of cutscenes you would have seen beforehand would have come from Story Mode or Road to WrestleMania. This is a game mode that I'm honestly baffled that it has not received a revival at some point since 2K took over, or at least taken this foundation and implemented more of these options into modern day Universe Mode, though we have started to see more of a shift back towards that in the last few years, but I digress. This game mode is highly enjoyable and rather satisfying once your product is complete. The only caveat is that it truly requires patience to see a project through to the end. All in all, this is one of the most slept on modes we've had in all of wrestling games if you ask me, and it deserves its place high on this list. Universe Mode. Of all of these game modes, Universe Mode has stood the test of time without the need of a rebranding and has mostly been untouched, and that last part is actually really unfortunate, but we aren't going down that road right now. Universe Mode is the ultimate game mode that allows you to create, run, or experience your WWE or maybe even non-WWE promotion. Well, at least it could be, if its potential were truly realized. While Universe Mode has since become even more open, Smackdown vs. Raw 2011's introduction into this game mode didn't have quite as many customization options as we've become used to now, but for its time, it was the first time players were met in the middle of total control and a live experience that could provide unexpected moments. This version of Universe Mode would see your show constantly evolve on its own, as alliances would form, break up, and more, but this time providing some of the visuals you wished were included into the general manager modes that had been gone for years by this time. In this iteration, even your play now and exhibition matches could have an effect on your universe, adding a live element to your gameplay where everything matters unless you choose otherwise. Anybody who has played a wrestling game in the past 14 years has more than likely heard of this game mode before, if not taken part in it themselves. Universe Mode has become well known for its lack of depth over the years, but we're going to strictly just talk about Smackdown vs. Raw 2011's version of this mode. The constant interference in matches definitely keeps you on your toes, though for control freaks like myself, the frequency in which the matches get interrupted may end up tampering with the stories and canon of your universe, and keeping attribute customization behind a paywall is absurd to me. But none of that should negate the absolute blast this game mode was when it came out, as this was a truly revolutionary game mode, but by now it feels as though it's almost second nature. It wasn't perfect, but it can't be denied that it was absolutely groundbreaking. Road to WrestleMania. This was truly a revamp of your standard single-player story mode. Road to WrestleMania took the mostly linear story mode and gave the player multiple immersive playthroughs unique to their own main character. Whether they're stories regarding brand warfare, Triple H having to choose between DX or Evolution, or maybe Undertaker taking part in supernatural shenanigans, this game mode was constantly providing fans with creative stories we hadn't seen before. Road to WrestleMania blew away the expectations we had for a single-player mode in wrestling games, and set a new standard that influenced the creation of Showcase Mode as well as My Rise, both modes that are available in today's games. There are hours upon hours to be spent playing through these, and the number of superstars available will definitely keep you eager to get through all of them, making for a much more rewarding single-player experience than the same stories available whoever you play as, to a few exceptions. In addition, various unlocks would come from Road to WrestleMania, with those unlocks relevant to the tasks at hand or things you get into. While they did start off fairly weak in Smackdown vs. Raw 2009, the quality of the unlocks did improve over the next two installments. Overall, Road to WrestleMania truly took the presentation and theatrics to another level, with television quality storylines, interesting matches, and opponents to keep things fresh, capped off with satisfying conclusions and unlockables. The only knock on this game that I can really come up with is that once you've played through these stories, there is very little replay value, even though there are numerous unlock requirements that may require you to revisit these modes with slightly different execution. This game mode wasn't perfect either, as rarely anything is in the world of professional wrestling, but I think just about everybody can reflect fondly on the spin this game mode brought to wrestling games, hailed as one of the greatest game modes of the title series. General Manager Mode. Here it is, the holy grail of wrestling game modes, and if you are amongst the group that believes this game mode is overrated, go ahead and hit that thumbs down now, because this next bit is going to get awfully annoying to you, I'm sure. And these last two spots could really be based off preference, depending on whether you favor presentation and cutscenes versus immersion and control. But I stand by the statement that General Manager Mode is the single greatest game mode in any wrestling game that we've seen, not just in the Smackdown vs. Raw title series, but to this day. Even game developers nowadays have attempted to recapture this magic with the reinvented My GM mode, but that is a far cry from even calling itself an imposter. As the name suggests, you find yourself in the shoes of the general manager of either Raw or Smackdown, tasked with proving yourself and rising above the competition to be named General Manager of the Year, and in theory, keep your job. This brought a simulation element to a game that at the time was still very fast-paced and arcadey. As someone who dumped tons of hours into sports management games and franchise modes, this game mode was just what I was looking for, though the option to jump into any and all matches on your show still tied the player into the action. Where this mode lacked in cutscenes and presentation, it absolutely excelled in engagement and replayability. Up until story designers' release in Smackdown vs. Raw 2010, General Manager Mode was the only avenue in which you could truly simulate your own promotion or WWE experience. The constant presence of the opposing general manager made for a challenge that, while exploitable, always pushed the player to be mindful of their booking. But the lack of consequences also allowed the player to play at their own pace and ignore the competition if you're looking for more of a casual playthrough. More so, if you had two controllers or wanted to play with a friend, you could choose to play as both brands, or in Smackdown vs. Raw 2008, all three brands, allowing for total control of your WWE. Strictly speaking on the true GM modes of Smackdown vs. Raw 2006 and 2007 though, there are very few flaws in this game mode if you ask me. This allowed the player to be as hands-on as they'd like, or just experience matches that are set through a randomly generated match card. The reason this game mode ranks so highly with me is the potential of spending hours upon hours into this mode without even playing a match. Add all of the in-ring elements and possibilities that are available throughout all of the other modes to the exceptions of a few cinematics, and you've got the total package, and the single greatest game mode in all of the Smackdown vs. Raw title series. What do your rankings look like? Post them below in the comments, I'd love to hear what you think. But that's going to do it for us in this video. Check out some more ranking videos here, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take it easy.